Week 4 of the college football season is almost underway. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we are going to begin our preview of the upcoming matchup against the USF Bulls. For the Louisville Cardinals, we will talk about what is at stake for Scott Satterfield's team while also identifying the key players to watch for both sides. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. As I always do, I want to thank you all once again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. We're beginning our preview of the upcoming Week 4 matchup against the South Florida Bulls. We'll begin by discussing what is at stake for the Louisville Cardinals. We will then dive into identifying the key players to watch for both Louisville and for South Florida. So, as we have done with each and every week of college football thus far for the Louisville Cardinals, we are once again talking about what is at stake for the Cardinals in this matchup. And for this week, it's a little bit different. The stakes are a little bit more unique. It's a different situation that has been kind of brought forth by a lackluster start, going 1-2. So let's first start out by saying that this is one of those games. It's a trip-up game. Very, very clear here. It is a trip-up game. It's one of those to where there's not a lot to gain for the Louisville Cardinals, but there is almost everything to lose. As of right now, on Wednesday evening at about 11:15 p.m. Eastern time, the Cardinals are a 14.5-point favorite over the South Florida Bulls on ESPN's website. So that's something to look at and to monitor going forward. The Cardinals have an 88.4% chance to win, according to ESPN's Football Power Index. The Bulls come into this matchup 1-2. But ultimately, like I said, the stage is being set for Louisville to, for lack of better terms, handle business here. If they were to lose this game, then you're opening possibly Pandora's box, but it's expected that the Cardinals win and that they do so in probably a convincing fashion. Now, I will say that a win is a win, but against South Florida, a team that you are technically probably supposed to beat, more so than almost all of the other opponents on your schedule outside of James Madison. Winning this game might not necessarily be enough optically, but I mean, a win is a win at the end of the day. It's all about seeing those improvements that we talked about, at the end of last show, heading into Week 4. And if you see some of those improvements and you get the win, then you might be able to swallow the fact that it might not be a big deficit. But at the end of the day, if Louisville is able to achieve what they're setting out to achieve, if they're able to come into this game, handle business, show improvement, and win by a decent margin, well, then what's at stake is getting sort of back on track, getting back to 500 and just doing what you're supposed to do, winning the games that you're supposed to win. At this point, there's not a lot to take away there. I don't necessarily think that a win against South Florida would really do too much in terms of changing the trajectory of the season, because, like I said, it is a pretty significant line here, 14.5. So it is implied that Louisville should win this game, and they obviously should do it by over 2 touchdowns. So if they end up winning this game, well, it's one of those, okay, well, you were supposed to, and you went out and handled business. Congratulations. That's really all it is. Now, obviously, you'll possibly give your team some more momentum heading into Week 5. You kind of pick the spirits back up. You get back in the win column, which is always a good feeling. So, from what it may do inside the program, well, then you never really know, and it could definitely help. But, looking at this from an outsider's perspective, looking at this from a analyst perspective, is that Louisville's supposed to win this game. And if they win this game, then it's just a matter of, okay, you did your job. However, there is a lot on the line here if you were to lose. Now, let's start out by saying South Florida is kind of an enigma this year. What I mean by that is it's hard to truly grasp how good the Bulls are. Yes, they're 1-2. They got absolutely, demolished in the opening game against against BYU, who's currently ranked. But even before that, I mean, it's BYU, yeah, they lost 50-21. They beat Howard 42-20, and then they lost at Florida, most notably at the end of last weekend, 31-28. Had a chance to actually probably win that game, missed a critical field goal as well. Florida had trouble stopping the read option with Gerry Bohanon and Brian Battie, and a mixture of other ball carriers. But South Florida looked solid against Florida. But then again, that poses the question, well, just how good are the Florida Gators? Yeah, sure, they beat Utah in the first game in the Swamp, but then they struggled against Kentucky, lost to the Wildcats in the Swamp. They, they barely survived against South Florida. It does beg the question that, hey, the Bulls might not necessarily be all that horrible of a team. I know their record over the past couple of seasons doesn't really help with that narrative, but they're a team that plays hard, and they showed last week it doesn't matter, where they play. I mean, they're going to show heart. They're going to show determination and grit. They have a Division I transfer at quarterback in Gerry Bohanon. They have a solid offensive line, some solid running backs as well. It is a read option offense, and then that's an offense that Louisville, historically under Scott Satterfield and even before then has struggled with. I mean, Air Force back in 2021, obviously in the bowl game last year, the various times that they played Georgia Tech, so on and so forth. The read option has been something that this team has not necessarily done a good job of taking care of. And then you factor in the tackling issues and things of that nature, and it really kind of makes you nervous about this matchup. Now, I do think that Louisville is the better team. They should win this game. They should win it by, multiple possessions. But make no mistake about it, the Cardinals cannot come into this game and sleepwalk, because we saw when Florida struggled with South Florida, the Bulls gave the Gators all they could ask for in the Swamp. Now, obviously, it's to question how good is Billy Napier's team in year one in Gainesville. Obviously, they've been kind of trending in the wrong direction, having some quarterback issues. But nonetheless, back to South Florida, if you lose this game, which I'm giving South Florida credit, and I think that they're better than people may be implying, make no mistake about it, this is still a game that Louisville should win and needs to win, because if you go 1-3, you are opening Pandora's box, so to speak. Basically meaning that, first of all, you're digging yourself into a hole that it may be hard, maybe not necessarily impossible, but very, very improbable that you get out of when it comes to obtaining bowl eligibility. Not only that, but you have to wonder what this effect will do on recruiting. Obviously, it seems like NIL has been a big trend upward for the football program and the university. But I mean, that doesn't always cure the fact that the team is 1-3, and 3 losses were against teams that arguably Louisville is better than, at least 2 of those for sure, depending on how good Syracuse actually is. But, I mean, you lose that game, and then, I mean, you are probably – I mean, I can't imagine what that would do for the fan base. Obviously, I'm an advocate for supporting the team no matter what, but a mass portion of the fan base that hasn't already kind of thrown in the towel, it's questionable how much support that the team would have moving forward. Now, granted, I don't necessarily agree with giving up on a team at any time. Let's call a spade here. The fan base is not necessarily behind Scott Satterfield and the coaching staff at this moment. A loss to South Florida would almost be irreversible damage, in my opinion, when it comes to the favor for the coaching staff in the eyes of the fan base. And going 1-3, like I said, I mean, you're really putting yourself in a bad spot to try to become bowl eligible, because then you would have to essentially beat Boston College, Virginia, James Madison. Then you're at 4 wins, and then you're going to have to upset and get 2 wins out of the group of Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, NC State, Kentucky, and Clemson. Although it's not impossible, very unlikely, because all of those teams currently are ranked. And if you cannot beat South Florida and in week 4, then that's definitely something that you have to talk about, that you have to focus on here, right? So ultimately, I think that there's not a lot to gain from a win against South Florida other than handling your business, getting another win in the win column, another opportunity to improve, and maybe you'll boost the team morale and the program morale just a tad bit, and focus on the next game and just handling business on a week in, week out basis. But if you lose, you have a chance to, or it offers the possibility of, just being that much further away from becoming bowl eligible. You struggle with losing the fan base. Recruiting could definitely take a hit as well. A team going 1-3 with the toughest part of their schedule still to go. So, that kind of begs to say. Sorry about that. But, I'm not going to keep repeating the same thing. Obviously, main moral here, not a lot to gain other than handling business, but a lot to lose if you were to end up losing this one. So let's dive a little deeper into this matchup, talk about the key players to watch for both teams. If you can remember the format, 4 Louisville players, 2 offense, 2 defense, and then 1 South Florida offense, 1 South Florida defensive player. We'll begin with the Louisville Cardinals. We'll do that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Nugenics. I'm 24. And I really haven't had too much issues with my body, but people in my family have tried out Nugenics before, and they've been very pleased with the results. Working out sometimes is a big time commitment. Nugenics allows you to kind of get that energy back in the body that you once had. It allows you to feel revived and working out like you used to. So, sometimes it's not your fault. As men age, our bodies naturally lose free testosterone, the man hormone, so to speak. It happens to every man and can make it more difficult to stay in shape and be energetic and active. Remember when winning felt easy? That's because when you were younger, you were at the peak of your testosterone production, what some have called the winner's hormone or the man hormone. Wouldn't it be nice to get that winner's edge again and that old swagger back in your step? Well, Nugenics Total T contains man-boosting key ingredients like testofen. It has been validated in 5 clinical studies shown to boost free testosterone levels in men. It's the #1 selling testosterone booster at GNC. It can help re-energize your life and get you back the powerful, confident, good-looking warrior that you used to be. You can get a complimentary bottle of Nugenics Total T when you text college to 231-231. Text now and get a bottle of Nugenics Thermo, their most powerful fat incinerator ever, with key ingredients to help you get back into shape fast. Absolutely free. That's text college to 231-231. The Louisville Cardinals have been seeing improvement over the past, with each and every game, I should say. Defensively, kind of got picked on a little bit after the Florida State game, but I feel like it's the offense that's kind of that needs to pick up the slack. In my opinion, 2 key players to focus on offensively: Malik Cunningham and Marshon Ford. Now, granted, like I said, I don't necessarily like talking about quarterbacks when it comes to identifying key players to watch, because I think it's pretty excessive, I should say, not obsessive, excessive, and it's pretty straightforward, kind of clear cut, very straightforward. The quarterback is obviously going to make a big difference for the respective offense, right? But Malik Cunningham, like I said, I think it's time for him to really take this team and take them to the next level. Had a better game last week, over 100 rushing yards. I think that it's just continued, time for him to get better. improve on his passing numbers. Only 1 passing touchdown to 3 interceptions this season, so he's struggled in that regard, but doing a better job as a runner. I think that South Florida, a team that's giving up over 440 yards of offense to opposing teams, Malik Cunningham needs to take advantage of going up against one of the defenses that he's going to be having more of a favorable matchup than others on the schedule. So he needs to continue to progress when it comes to going through his reads, getting other guys involved, especially with D. Wiggins out, continuing to spread the ball around, making good decisions, being more accurate on his throws. Obviously, it's a team sport, so it's not all on just Malik, but I think that this is a good opportunity for him to get his swagger back here against a defense that isn't necessarily all that great. Get your confidence back. Have a very, very good performance both through the air and on the ground, and I think that could do solid wonders before you have a 2-game road stand first against the Boston College Eagles. Also, Marshawn Ford, it is time for Ford to break out. He is simply due through the first 3 games. Only 8 receptions for 65 yards. He's averaging 8.1 yards per catch. Simply put, it is time for a signature Marshawn Ford game. Maybe he doesn't have over 100 yards receiving, but I think that this is an opportunity for him to rack up over 5 catches for over 60 yards. Simply maybe get close to the receiving yards that he's accumulated so far, and also find the end zone. I think that it's time for Malik Cunningham to fall back on his security blanket a little bit and go to Marshon Ford more. The walking mismatch hasn't really been utilized a ton so far for the offense. I think that this is a great opportunity for the Louisville offense to get kicked back into gear and start to play like they did last season. Right now, the 69th best offense in the country just simply kind of isn't good enough going forward, especially with the personnel that you consider on this offense. So I think that this is a big game for Marshawn Ford to possibly have. Defensively, last week was a week that Kendrick Duncan Jr. likely would like to forget. But this week, the leading tackler with, I think, 24 total tackles on the season. It's a big opportunity for him to get involved in the rushing defense and to redeem himself, so to speak. You're going up against a team that is very RPO dominant, a lot of option play from the Bulls with Gerry Bohanon and Brian Battie. And then, you have your opportunity to really lead this Cardinals rushing defense. I think the other defender that needs to be focused on here is Monty Montgomery. I think with his speed and pursuit, this is an opportunity for him to get involved, and they're going to need him and Kendrick Duncan Jr. both to play very stellar games when going up against an option offense like this, to be able to stay grounded at the line of scrimmage, be able to identify and stay disciplined when it comes to locking on to the opposing ball carrier, because deception is a huge part of the option offense. So I think that this is a key ingredient for this Louisville defense, is just having your big time playmakers sniffing out reads, making the right decisions, and just essentially completing tackles as well. So Kendrick Duncan Jr., Monty Montgomery are the two, in my opinion, to focus on here, because number one, they're both leaders on this defense, two verbal leaders that are going to be relied upon in this matchup, to where communication is going to be a big, big factor in this. And also from a statistical standpoint, I mean, you're talking about 2 guys that are ranked in the top 4 on the team respectively in total tackles leading up into week 4. So Kendrick Duncan Jr., this is an opportunity for him to bounce back, and it's also a game for Monty Montgomery to leave his stamp, get back to that pre knee injury level, and start to try to take this Louisville defense to the next level, so to speak. So Malik Cunningham, Marshon Ford offensively, Kendrick Duncan Jr., and Monty Montgomery defensively. Now let's transition over into the South Florida side of things. We'll do that after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting info this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. As I mentioned, for South Florida, I think this is pretty self-explanatory when you talk about their rushing attack and the option offense that they utilize. Quarterback Gerry Bohanon, running back Brian Battie are the two to focus on offensively. I think it's a 1A, 1B situation. Both of those guys are combined for nearly 400 yards so far, both averaging over 6 yards per carry. Now take away a 60-yard touchdown run by Brian Battie, and that average probably goes down. But the 1-2 punch of Bohanon and Battie are going to be a very tall task for the Louisville defense because they operate that that rushing option to a very effective level and at a very high standard. So something that obviously South Florida's success levels are going to be very, very in correlation with how successful those two guys are going to be able to be, especially Bohanon. Doesn't have a passing touchdown to his name currently, has 4 interceptions, has thrown 507 yards, 46 for 86, 53.5 completion percentage, and has gotten sacked one time. But hasn't been the greatest through the air, hasn't found the end zone yet, like I said, but hasn't done a good job of taking care of the ball either with 4 interceptions. So Bohanon, a guy that has played at the Power 5 level, the transfer from Baylor, threw for over 2,200 yards and 18 touchdowns last year for the Bears and Dave Aranda's squad down in Waco. It's a guy that obviously has played in some big-time games, and coming into Cardinal Stadium, I don't think that he's going to be rattled at all, especially since what they almost just did down in Florida, in Gainesville, in the Swamp. But he is definitely the one to focus on here offensively, with Brian Battie right there as well, because he's coming off of a 150-yard game, which is a career day for him against the Florida defense. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory here, the two players to watch on offense, because they have such a heavy indication on how successful this day is going to be for Jeff Scott's squad on offense. Defensively speaking, I mean, this is a team that hasn't been all that great, giving up almost 440 yards, total offense to their opponents. I think Mekhi LaPointe, the only player on South Florida's squad to record a sack and an interception. He also leads the team with 21 tackles. One of the leaders on defense, 6'2" senior defensive back from Seffner, Florida, leads the team with 21 total tackles, 16 of those solo. With this Louisville team and his ability to get after the quarterback, get into the opposing backfield. Also, a good job in coverage as well. He's going to be the guy that Jeff Scott and the USF defense relies upon a ton to make some plays. Now, whether or not he's guarding, he's probably going to guard Tyler Hudson, if I had to say. If not him, it's probably Amari Huggins-Bruce or Marshawn Ford. He's going to have a tall task with the various Louisville passing members, receivers, I should say, for lack of better terms. With the versatile skill set that the Louisville receiving core collectively has. Tyler Hudson, probably the number one receiver, obviously. That's probably who he's going to go up against, one of the most underrated receivers in the conference as it stands. So, like I said, I think that defensively there's a couple different ways you could go here, but the fact that LaPointe has been such a big member in the rushing defense, has an interception, recorded a sack, is the leader of this defense as a senior. I think it's pretty self-explanatory here. So LaPointe on defense. Offensively, it's the 1A, 1B. Gerry Bohanon, Brian Battie duo in the read option. We'll talk about what Louisville needs to do to limit both of those guys on tomorrow's episode. But not a lot of surprise here in terms of the players to watch. To wrap up, like I mentioned, a lot at stake here for the Cardinals. Not a lot to gain, but a ton to lose if you were to lose this one. Malik Cunningham, Marshon Ford, the players to watch on offense for the Cardinals. Kendrick Duncan Jr., Monty Montgomery on defense. And for South Florida, quarterback Gerry Bohanon, running back Brian Battie, and defensive back. What did I just say? I totally just forgot his first name. Why did I just forget his first name? It's going to drive me nuts now. Mekhi LaPointe. I was going to say Brian LaPointe, but Mekhi LaPointe is the player to watch defensively. So thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Do yourself a favor, check out Locked On ACC, hosted by Candace Cooper. That podcast is found 5 days a week, just like Locked On Louisville. No better way to get your conference news. So definitely be sure to check that out. Tomorrow it's going to be talking about what Louisville needs to do to come out with a victory. But that's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.